Welcome back to the One Winning Pod, Ravens History Corner. All right, guys, week 9, the Ravens will be traveling to New Orleans to play the Andy Dalton-led New Orleans Saints on Monday Night Football. And, this is an interesting stat here if you look at this. So it has been since 2010, since the Ravens have gone a season without playing Andy Dalton. Dalton was drafted by the Bengals after Carson Palmer said he was fed up with the team and held out a training camp. Eventually, the Bengals would trade him that year, but Andy Dalton came in, and honestly, the guy was solid. He was solid for the Bengals. I think if you want to look at the most feared matchups the Ravens have had against AFC North quarterback opponents, if you look at the list, it's probably, would say Ben Roethlisberger is definitely number one. After that, you're looking at Carson Palmer, Steve McNair back to the AFC Central days. You probably put even Mark Brunell ahead of Andy Dalton. So, not really a guy that the Ravens ever felt like they couldn't beat, but certainly this guy, he's been a competitor throughout his days here in the NFL. 500 record against the Ravens, 8-8 in his career, 8-10 overall, because since 2019, after the Bengals moved on from him, 2019 was his last year with the team, he's just kept ending up on NFC teams that the Ravens end up playing in the next year. 2020, Dalton was the backup for Dallas. He was in there when the Ravens played against the Cowboys. Ravens won that game, and then obviously last year in Chicago, Dalton was the starting quarterback in that game. So, again, you look at this game, it's not exactly the Ravens versus Ben Roethlisberger, or the Ravens versus Tom Brady, but the Ravens have had some good matchups against this guy. And in this episode this week, we're going to look at the top 5 games in Ravens history, top 5 most memorable against Dalton. And there are definitely some, starting with last year's game in 2021 against the Bears in Chicago. I think we got to put this on the list, even though, of course, 2021, not a year the Ravens would make the playoffs, but you look at this game, and Tyler Huntley had to start for Lamar. Lamar was sick, was unable to play in the game, and this was a defensive battle with the score, very low-scoring game. And then late in the fourth quarter, the Ravens did zero blitz on Dalton. What does he do? Deep ball to Marquise Goodwin. Gets the touchdown. The Bears are up. Ravens are able to drive back and score a touchdown. Devonta Freeman. And then put the ball back in Andy Dalton's hands. Last play of the game, he's going to try and attempt a Hail Mary, but Tyus Bowser, the guy who we're expecting to come back this week, just bullies the right tackle and sacks Andy Dalton on the ground. Ravens get the win. It was a back-and-forth game with an exciting ending, despite the fact that the beginning of the game, not terribly memorable, but, I think you got to put it in there. All right, so number 4 on this list. Unfortunately, there's going to be some losses here for the Ravens. I think you can still put this as memorable, though. The start of the 2014 season, Week 1, Steve Smith's first game with the Ravens. This was a tight defensive game, and then Andy Dalton was able to hit A.J. Green for a long touchdown, put the Bengals up in this game, and the Ravens would respond. Ravens would respond with Flacco connecting to Steve Smith for a touchdown. That was Steve Smith's first touchdown as a Raven, obviously, and threw down the defender on his way to the end zone. Just an excellent play there. Very memorable play for the Ravens. Unfortunately, though, it would be in a loss. The Bengals would come back, and they would retake the lead in the game, and that would be it. But despite the fact the Ravens were unable to win that game, I think it was a very memorable matchup between the Ravens and Andy Dalton. At number 3 on this list, I think we're going to look at the first time that Andy Dalton played against the Ravens. 2011, this game was in Baltimore, and Dalton, he didn't play particularly well in this game, and I think this game is kind of an encompassing of what the matchups have really been between Andy Dalton and the Baltimore Ravens. Dalton doesn't have to play well in these games to keep his team in there. You got to give the guy credit. He's got grit. He's a football player. And in this game, the Ravens, they got up to a big lead, 31-14, entering the fourth quarter off a Joe Flacco pass to Torrey Smith, 38 yards, put the Ravens ahead in this game. But the Bengals, they didn't quit. A.J. Green was out this game, but Andy Dalton had his first career touchdown pass against the Ravens in the fourth quarter. A deep ball to Andre Caldwell. And then the Bengals would also score a field goal later in that game, and they would be driving. They'd be driving at the end of the game, down 7 in the red zone. The Ravens were going to have to put up a fight here to stop the Bengals from tying the game. But the Bengals would go for it on fourth down. Andy Dalton was sacked by Pernell McPhee, and that was it. That was the game the Ravens were able to get their first win against Andy Dalton in the first matchup between these two teams, with Dalton at the starting quarterback position. And then at number 2 on this list, I got to do it. It was a game that none of us like to think about. 2017, the end of the season there. Tight game. Obviously, the Bengals got up to a huge lead in that one, but the second half would see the Ravens surging. They would climb back in this game, down 24-10, but they would come back and be up by 3 points. And we all know what happened. The Bengals, with only a little more than 2 minutes left on the clock, would get backed up 4th and 12 and near midfield. And unfortunately, the Ravens, we know what happened. That was the pass to Boyd. He's able to run it into the end zone, and the Ravens just unable to answer that. The Ravens would be knocked out of the playoffs from that play. A memorable game, despite the fact that the Ravens were unable to win it. But number 1 on this list, I'm going to put it as a Ravens win. A Ravens win here. We're going to look at 2018. Yes, this game is Lamar Jackson, his first start in the NFL right out of the bye week in 2018. Jackson started against Cincinnati Bengals opposite Andy Dalton. And it wasn't just Lamar Jackson's first game as a starter. We got to give credit here. Gus Edwards, this is his first career start as well. And both Jackson and Edwards, they rushed for over 100 yards, 119 for Jackson, 115 for Gus. And, the Bengals, they put up a big fight here. Ravens, they get up to a 13-7 lead leading into halftime, but then Andy Dalton and the Bengals, they come back. 2 touchdown passes here from Dalton to give them the lead, but the Ravens, they would claw back, and they would be able to get a field goal lead, and then to lead 24-21 in the fourth quarter. Missed field goal by the Bengals, though, as well as excellent pass breakup by Marlon Humphrey on fourth down on the Bengals' final drive. Sealed the win, the first career win for Lamar Jackson, and it came in a matchup against Andy Dalton. All right, so that's what we're looking at here. That's what I think are the top 5 games between the Baltimore Ravens and Andy Dalton. We've got another matchup here against Dalton against the New Orleans Saints coming up on Monday night. Who knows? Will this be the final time that the Ravens face off against Andy Dalton, or is he going to show up, on an NFC West team next year and play the Ravens? We'll just have to see what happens. But for now, 8-10 record for Andy Dalton against the Ravens. And that means the Ravens 10-8 against Dalton, and hopefully it'll be 11-8 after this Monday night game. And remember, as always, if you like this content and want to get great Ravens content all season long, you can follow us, subscribe on YouTube, as well as our podcast for excellent Ravens coverage all season long.